My name's Eli Warren, and for the past 6 months, I've worked as a maintenance technician at the Deepwater Marine Research Institute, a place most people in town don't even know exists. It sits 6 miles down the coastal highway, hidden behind tall metal fences and cliffs that always smell like salt and rust. From the outside, it's just another government complex, gray concrete and no signage. But inside, it's all humming pipes, glass tunnels, and endless rows of aquariums filled with things that don't look like they belong on this planet. I didn't plan to end up here. I used to fix filtration systems for public aquariums. Then a recruiter called, offered double pay, and said I'd be working below the main research level. He didn't say how far below. He didn't say why we weren't allowed to talk about what we cleaned. When I arrived, a man named Heller from administration handed me a laminated paper titled Primary Handling Procedures. That was our orientation. No welcome video, no tour, just a single sheet with 5 rules printed neatly in bold type. Do not feed the nocturnal specimens after midnight. Do not drain or refill tanks 5, 7, or 9 without written clearance. Do not observe the invertebrate hall without a partner present. All alarms are to be obeyed, regardless of origin or explanation. Never remain in the filtration wing past 2:30. I thought it was a joke, something for new hires to keep them on edge. Heller didn't smile. He just said, "Follow those and you'll last longer than the last guy," before walking off. The next thing I noticed was the smell, sharp, electric, and metallic. It wasn't chlorine or salt water. It reminded me of the air right before lightning hits, when the ozone cuts through everything else. The walls were always slightly damp, and the lights buzzed at a low frequency that made my teeth ache. My first assignment was Tank 7A in the East Wing, a research enclosure 30 feet wide, filled with dark water that shimmered faintly green. My job was simple: check the salinity, clean the viewing glass, and swap out 2 filters. It sounded routine, but nothing down there ever felt routine. When I stood beside that tank for the first time, I could feel a vibration through the soles of my boots. The pumps beneath the floor thrummed in rhythm, almost like a slow heartbeat. I told myself it was just machinery, but the longer I listened, the more it matched my own pulse. I was wiping condensation from the outer glass when Marla, my shift lead, walked in. "Don't get too close to that one," she said, flipping through her clipboard. "Why?" I asked. "Just don't. And if you're still here past midnight, don't feed it. Ever." She didn't elaborate. That first week, I learned how to fall into the rhythm of the Institute. Everything ran on time. 10 a.m. for water tests, 12 p.m. for feedings, 2 p.m. for filter swaps. All results were logged manually on paper, sealed into drawers, and replaced the next day with fresh forms. There were computers in the lab, but no one touched them. I once asked why. Miguel, one of the older techs, laughed quietly. "They used to," he said, "until the readings started writing back." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. The tanks in Deepwater weren't what you'd call fish tanks. Some held coral ecosystems, others plankton cultures glowing like constellations. But there were deeper ones too long, black chambers with thick glass that distorted what was inside. Sometimes you'd catch the faintest motion, something moving in a way that didn't seem like swimming. Every now and then, a memo appeared on the bulletin board, typed, unmarked. They weren't signed or dated, just small updates to the rules. Do not use reflective surfaces near containment glass. Keep your headset volume low during sonar sweeps. If you hear tapping from inside, do not tap back. Each time a new memo went up, the staff would go quiet for a few days. No one ever said what happened to make the rule necessary. By my 3rd week, I'd stopped asking questions. The pay was good, and silence seemed to be part of the job description. One night, Marla asked me to stay late and finish the filtration checks. She said she'd left early forms in my locker, I didn't think much of it until I realized the entire lower wing emptied after 11 p.m. The corridors went silent, except for the hum of water pumps and the distant drip of condensation from the ceiling. At 11:58, I was tightening a valve behind tank 7A when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then everything stopped. The hum of the pumps cut out. The sound of rushing water faded until there was nothing. Absolute silence. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing against the glass. The air thickened, and for a moment, I felt pressure in my ears like I was underwater without being submerged. Then something pressed against the inside of the tank. It was broad and indistinct, the size of a person's hand, but without fingers, just a dark shape spreading outward. The glass bulged slightly, as if something immense was pressing its face against it. And just like that, the power returned. Lights buzzed back on, pumps roared, and the glass was empty. No marks, no fog. I checked my watch. 12:02 a.m. The next morning, I found a note slipped under my locker door. It was typed on yellow paper, same as the memos. Do not service tank 7A alone after midnight. I asked Marla if she'd left it. She said no, but her voice tightened. Whoever sent it did you a favor, she said. Just follow it. That night, I caught Miguel staring at the tank logs for 7A. When I asked what he was looking for, he said, last week, this tank registered a power spike at 12:02 a.m. Every sensor dropped to 0 for 3 seconds. Then it came back. That's the kind of thing we don't file reports on. He tapped the side of his head. We remember it instead. Days passed. I began to notice little things. Ripples appearing on the surface of water, even when the pumps were off. Condensation forming hand-like streaks on viewing glass. Readings on the monitors that dipped below physical possibility, negative temperatures. Oxygen levels exceeding saturation. It all became background noise. You get used to anything if you see it every day, until you don't. One evening, during routine cleaning, I used a flashlight with a mirrored rim to check the bottom of a tank. The light beam fractured into thin, shifting strands like it was bending through water that wasn't there. The reflections multiplied, forming pale circles on the far wall that looked like eyes. For a second, I thought I saw something blink. When I shut the light off, the after images stayed in my vision for far too long. The next morning, another note appeared. You've been seen. Avoid reflections for 72 hours. No name, no initials this time. From then on, the building itself began to feel awake. The smell of ozone grew stronger in the hallways, and every time I entered a room, the lights would dim for a moment before stabilizing as if acknowledging me. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the tank glass, but the face looking back wasn't moving quite right. A fraction too slow, a breath out of sync. I told myself I was just tired, overworked, but the Institute had a way of swallowing those doubts. It was like a living organism, metal walls pulsing, air vents breathing, circuits humming beneath the floors. A week later, I was assigned to check a pressure imbalance in the quarantine corridor. The supervisor handed me an access badge and said, without meeting my eyes, "Take someone with you, it's protocol." When I asked who was available, he didn't respond, just stared past me, mouth slightly open, as if he was listening for something far away. So I went alone. And that was when I started to understand. The rules weren't there to protect the tanks. They were there to protect us. The first thing you learn working at Deepwater is how to listen. Not to people they barely talk, but to the machinery. The pulse of the pumps, the rhythm of the filters, the low hum of circulation lines running through the walls like veins. If something changes even slightly, you feel it before you hear it. The air shifts, the floor trembles, the lights buzz out of sync. That night in the quarantine corridor, the air felt wrong the moment I stepped in. It was colder, drier, and smelled faintly of copper. The corridor stretched ahead like a tunnel with tanks on both sides, all dark, their nameplates stripped clean. A flickering sign above the entrance read, Containment Level C. I was supposed to check a pressure imbalance on tank Q12, that's all. The readout upstairs had shown a minor anomaly, probably a sensor fault. I told myself it was nothing. The pumps were still running, but quietly, too quietly. Normally, they're loud enough to drown out your own thoughts. That night, though, I could hear my boots scrape against the grated metal floor. I could hear my breathing echo off the glass. I kept thinking about the rule. Do not remain in the filtration wing past 2:30. It wasn't 2:30 yet, but that didn't stop the thought from crawling under my skin. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. The steady pulse of the pumps began to fade until there was just one sound, a slow, rhythmic ticking. Tick, tick, tick. At first I thought it was a leaking valve. Then I realized it wasn't mechanical. It was coming from inside one of the tanks. The water inside Q12 looked thick, almost gelatinous, swirling lazily in the dim blue light. When I leaned closer, I saw faint trails of phosphorescence moving just beneath the surface, like something large turning over, too deep to see clearly. The tick came again, louder this time, 3 taps, evenly spaced. I remembered one of the memos. If you hear tapping from inside, do not tap back. It had seemed funny when I read it on the board. Now, standing alone in the dark, it didn't feel funny at all. Still, instinct got the better of me. I reached out, meaning to check the glass for vibration. The moment my fingertips brushed it, the entire tank vibrated just once, and a pulse of cold radiated through the glass and into my hand. I yanked it back immediately. My fingertips were damp, but not from condensation. Whatever had pressed against the inside had left something behind, a faint smear that shimmered under the light, like oil on water. The pumps rumbled awake again, and the noise startled me enough that I dropped my wrench. It clattered on the floor and rolled beneath the catwalk. I bent to grab it and froze. Something was crouched behind the far tank, a shadow, thin, tall, slightly off from human shape, its edges blurred by the light. For a heartbeat, it stayed still. Then it straightened, fluidly, as if unfolding. I blinked, and it was gone. Just an empty corridor, humming softly with machinery. I forced myself to log the maintenance check, hand shaking slightly as I wrote down the numbers. The gauge read normal again. Pressure stable. No leaks. No imbalance. Before leaving, I turned to look back one last time. The faint shimmer on the glass was gone. But just as I reached the door, the pumps cut out again, not all at once, but one by one. The silence returned in waves. That's when I heard it, a voice, faint, almost inaudible beneath the drip of condensation. It came from the tank, somewhere beneath the surface. A wet whisper, distorted by water and glass. It didn't sound like words, not exactly, more like the rhythm of speech without language. A cadence, a tone, a pattern of calling. I didn't wait to hear more. I backed out of the corridor, kept my eyes on the floor, and didn't stop until I was through the security door. The moment I stepped into the main hall, the hum of machinery returned, full, steady, normal. The lights seemed brighter, the air warmer. I told myself it was fatigue, that maybe the lower corridors amplified sound differently. That's what I wrote in my report, auditory distortion due to acoustics. But when I turned in the maintenance log, Heller was waiting by the desk. He didn't look at the papers. He just asked, "Did you respond to the sound?" I froze. "What sound?" He stared for a long time before saying quietly, "Good, don't." Then he took the logbook from my hands and tore out the last page. After that night, things started changing. Small things. The next morning, the analog log for tank Q12 had a new entry, written in my handwriting. Only I hadn't written it. 2:17 a.m. pressure, balanced. Acknowledged response. It wasn't my words, but the ink was identical, and the signature was mine. When I asked Miguel about it, he didn't laugh this time. He said, "Sometimes the system writes things for you. Just make sure it never writes to you." I didn't understand what that meant until later that week. During another maintenance check, the lights dimmed again, just for a second, and all the gauges on the panel flickered to 0. Then, faintly, across the intercom, a voice said, "Tank 7A, breathing irregular. Technician Eli Warren to respond." It wasn't the usual automated tone. It sounded like someone whispering through static. I froze, because there was no intercom announcement scheduled that night, and no one else was on shift. I stared at the speaker on the wall. The sound came again, clearer this time, the same rasping whisper from the quarantine corridor. "Technician Eli Warren, respond." The pump stopped. The lights steadied. Everything went still again. That silence, that impossible, heavy silence, filled every inch of the hallway. You don't notice how loud life is until everything stops making noise. No hum, no footsteps, no breath. Just quiet, so dense, it feels like the air has weight. That's what we called the quiet between pumps. Everyone who's worked at Deepwater long enough has heard it at least once. But no one talks about what comes after. When the hum finally returned, the gauges flickered back to normal. The intercom crackled once, then went dead. And in the corner of my logbook, in faint pencil I didn't remember leaving, were 3 new words. "It knows you." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the staff lounge, staring at the vending machine hum, just listening, trying to reassure myself that sound still existed. Miguel came in around dawn, poured himself coffee, and sat across from me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. After a while, he said, "You heard the quiet, didn't you?" I nodded. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "It's not the tanks. It's the building. The pumps keep it asleep. When they stop, it starts to listen." He stood, dropped his mug in the sink, and added quietly, "Just follow the rules. They're not for us to understand. They're for us to survive." Then he left, leaving the smell of burnt coffee and metal behind. Later that day, another memo appeared on the board. "Never speak to a specimen by name, ever. No explanation, no initials. Just that one rule, freshly typed, pinned with a new thumbtack." Someone had written my name in faint pencil beneath it, then erased it. That night, I was reassigned to the invertebrate hall, the one we're never supposed to enter alone. Marla handed me the clipboard and said softly, "Don't make noise in there. They'll notice." Her voice trembled slightly, like she'd already heard what happens when they do. And as I walked down that dark corridor, the hum of the pumps faded again, one by one, until I realized the silence wasn't an absence anymore. It was a presence, waiting. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain against my window. Steady, patient, like fingertips drumming on glass. I'd barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those flashes in the tank, that shifting shadow behind the glass, the one that moved like it was watching me instead of the other way around. I told myself I'd imagined it. I'd been working overtime, cleaning filters, breathing in the chemical smell of disinfectant. It messes with your head after a while. But when I looked at my uniform hanging by the door, still damp from last night's shift, the faint scent of salt water and bleach made my stomach twist. Something had felt off about that water. When I got to the institute, the place was quieter than usual. The rain had turned the concrete walkways slick, and the tanks glowed dimly through the glass walls, their lights reduced to a faint blue haze in the gloom. Even the receptionist didn't look up when I passed. It felt like walking into a church after the sermon empty, but somehow not alone. Down in the filtration corridor, I heard the low hum of the circulation pumps. Normally, it's a comforting sound, steady, mechanical, but that morning, it pulsed unevenly, like something was clogging the system. I clocked in, grabbed my gloves, and checked the duty sheet. Next to my name, someone had scribbled a new task in red marker. Tank 9, B drain 15%. Scrape interior glass. No brushes, no lights. That last part threw me. No lights? The tanks always had to be lit when we cleaned. Visibility was essential. And no brushes. We used sterilized brushes to scrape algae, per procedure. I went to the supply room, where Marla was filling a tray with test vials. "Hey," I said, "you know anything about 9B? The note says no lights." She paused, eyes flicking up just enough to meet mine. "Follow the note," she said flatly, and turned back to her samples. That was it. No explanation, no small talk. Just that. Tank 9. B sat in the farthest corner of the main hall, a massive cylindrical tank built into the foundation itself, with its own pump system and sealed control valves. I'd only worked it once before, with supervision. The water inside was darker than the others, even with the overhead fluorescence on. When I got close, I noticed something strange. The viewing glass wasn't fogged or dirty, but there was a faint residue along the lower curve, like fingerprints dragged through condensation. Except these weren't human-sized. They were longer, wider. I set up the drain valve and watched the level drop slowly 100 liters, 200, 300. The sound echoed in the empty hall, a deep gurgling that made the air feel heavier. When it reached the marked level, I shut the valve and climbed up the service ladder with a scraper in hand. The rule said no lights, but the water itself seemed to emit a faint blue luminescence, not from the bulbs, but from within. As I leaned closer, that glow thickened, like something inside was stirring up sediment. Then I saw it a small ripple near the center. It spread outward in perfect circles, even though the surface was still. Probably the pump, I muttered to myself. But the pumps were off. I dipped the scraper against the glass, gently scraping away the residue. The moment I touched it, the glow pulsed once, twice, then faded completely. I blinked, and in that instant, I caught a reflection that wasn't mine. Just for a second, a shape behind me. I spun around, heart hammering. No one, only rows of tanks and the reflection of their shifting water on the floor. When I turned back, there was a sound tap, tap, tap from inside the glass, like someone knocking from underwater. I froze. 3 slow knocks. Pause. Then 2 more. I leaned closer, trying to peer through the murk. Something pale moved deep within the tank, drifting upward, long and thin like a ribbon or a tendril. I couldn't make out where it began or ended. It was just there, swaying gently, as though reaching for the surface. My radio crackled suddenly. "Daniel, report." It was Mr. Finch, the night supervisor. I nearly dropped the scraper. "Yeah, I'm, at 9B, just cleaning residue. Did you use the lights?" "No, sir." There was a pause. "Good. Keep it that way. When you're done, seal the hatch and don't look at the reflection when you climb down." The reflection. I didn't even have time to ask what he meant. The radio clicked off before I could reply. I stared at the tank again, and my own reflection stared back faint, distorted, bending with the curve of the glass. Only it wasn't moving exactly as I was. Its head tilted slower, delayed. My hand lifted the scraper, and in the reflection, the scraper lagged behind, like it was underwater too. I backed down the ladder, forcing myself not to glance at the glass again. I sealed the hatch, my hands trembling slightly. As I turned away, I saw movement in my peripheral vision, the reflection in the tank still standing there, just barely visible in the corner of my eye. But when I blinked, it was gone. That night, I stayed late in the break room, pretending to fill out reports while trying to shake the unease. Finch passed by once, gave me a look that said you shouldn't ask questions, and kept walking. I noticed something else before leaving the wall of staff portraits near the entrance. There used to be more faces there. I remembered that from orientation. Now, there were gaps, small holes where frames had been removed. When I asked Marla the next day, she said, "Maintenance turnover's high. People come and go, but the holes in the paint were old. The outline of the missing frames faded by time." That night, when I got home, I finally dared to look into my bathroom mirror while brushing my teeth. For a split second, I could have sworn my reflection blinked after I did. Daniel begins noticing that reflections and glass surfaces inside the Institute behave strangely, sometimes lagging, sometimes showing things that aren't there. The rules about not looking at reflections suddenly make more sense, and yet the reason behind them remains deeply buried in the Institute's history. After what happened with Tank 9B, I started paying more attention to glass. Not just the tank's windows, control panels, even the slick sheen on the corridor floors. I couldn't help it. Once you notice something looking back at you, even once, you can't unsee it. The reflections around the Deepwater Institute weren't right. They didn't move like real reflections. They were delayed, just slightly off, like watching yourself on a live feed with bad buffering. Sometimes they'd catch up instantly. Other times, they stayed behind a few frames too long. I mentioned it to Marla over coffee in the break room, careful to sound casual. "Do you ever notice the reflections here lag?" She didn't even look up from her cup. "Stop staring at them," she said quietly. "That's how they notice you back." Before I could ask what she meant, she got up and left. That was how everyone talked at the Institute, in half sentences. Like, finishing them might get you in trouble. The next night, Finch called a quick meeting in the control bay. There were only 4 of us on the night crew: me, Marla, a technician named Yuri, and Finch himself. The 5th slot on the roster was blank, though I could swear I remembered someone else had worked with us earlier in the week. Finch stood by the central console, a clipboard tucked under one arm. His expression was unreadable. "There's been an incident near Tank 4D, he said. "Do not approach it until further notice. Maintenance drones will handle it remotely." Yuri frowned. "What kind of incident?" Finch didn't answer directly. "You'll see the barrier tape when you pass the observation wing. Don't cross it, and remember," his eyes settled on me for half a beat too long, "if you see anything moving behind the glass, it's not your reflection. Keep walking." That set the tone for the night. I had routine filter checks in the lower corridor, the one that looped behind the shark tank. The sound of rushing water usually drowned out everything else, but tonight it felt louder, almost alive. Each step echoed back a little too slowly, like the hallway itself was repeating after me. Halfway through my shift, the lights flickered. It wasn't unusual. The building's power grid was ancient, but this time, the flicker lingered. For about 3 seconds, everything went pitch black, and in that moment of dark, I heard a single muffled thud. Not from above or below, but from the glass itself. When the lights came back, I saw something pressed against the inside of the tank wall. A hand, pale, human-sized. It smeared slowly downward, leaving behind a faint trail like condensation. But Tank 4D was sealed. No human ever went inside. I approached cautiously, squinting through the rippling blue water. Nothing there now, just schools of silver fish darting in circles. The smear had already faded. Then I noticed the tape Finch had mentioned, a strip of yellow warning tape stretched across the catwalk ahead. On it, the words, "Do not clean reflective breach." I stopped dead in my tracks. Reflective breach? I'd never heard that term before. The radio crackled. "Daniel," Finch's voice said, calm but sharp. "What did I tell you about approaching the barrier?" I froze. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even crossed the line. "I'm just running the filters," I said. "Didn't go past the tape." "Good," he said. "Keep it that way. And Daniel, if you see your reflection in that glass, don't wave back." The radio clicked off. That's when I noticed the reflection. It wasn't right. My posture was slightly different. Shoulders tilted, face turned just a little more than it should have been. The reflection's mouth moved, slow and deliberate, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, heart racing, the radio still in my hand. When I looked again, it was gone. I decided to take the long route back through the supply corridor. It was narrow, lined with pipes that dripped condensation onto the floor. The air smelled metallic and damp. I could hear the faint whoosh of water in the walls, like something was moving inside the pipes too, something heavy. When I turned the corner, I almost slipped. The floor was wet, puddled beneath the emergency lights. At first I thought it was a leak until I saw the footprints. Bare, human, but reversed. The toes were pointed away from where the steps were going, like someone had walked backward the entire way. They led straight to the janitorial locker. Every instinct told me to walk away, but curiosity is a bad habit in places like this. I opened the locker door. Inside, only cleaning supplies, mops, buckets, a rolled-up tarp. But the mirror bolted to the inside of the door caught my eye. My reflection was there, but the lighting was wrong. Behind my reflected self, the hallway was empty. The real hallway behind me wasn't. Someone was standing there. I spun around, no one, just the dripping pipes. I turned back, and the reflection was still there, still showing that faint silhouette standing behind me. Then the silhouette moved closer. I slammed the locker door shut, heart hammering so hard I could hear it echo in the pipes. My palms were slick with sweat, and I realized I'd left faint handprints on the metal. That's when I finally understood what Finch had meant about reflective breaches. Whatever they were, they didn't just appear in the water, they used reflections. Any surface, any shine. When my shift ended, I stayed back, sitting on a bench near the lockers. I didn't want to go home. The idea of looking into another mirror, even in my own bathroom, made my skin crawl. Marla walked past me without a word, but she paused at the door and said, almost like she'd been waiting for the right moment, "They like the ones who look too long. Don't give them a reason." Then she left, leaving me with only the humming of the tanks and the faint drip of water behind the walls. That night, I caught my reflection in the dark window of the staff bus. It was late, the glass faintly fogged from my breath. I was exhausted. My reflection wasn't. It smiled at me slow, deliberate, a second too late. The Institute's rules around reflections begin to make more sense, and Daniel realizes the anomalies are spreading beyond the tanks into mirrors, windows, and even puddles. The staff grows eerily silent about disappearances, and Daniel starts investigating what reflective breaches really mean, uncovering records that the Institute tried to bury. Sleep didn't come easily after that night. Every reflective surface in my apartment was covered by morning mirrors, windows, even the glass on my clock. I draped them with towels and blankets, anything that could dull the shine. Still, I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. to the faint sound of water dripping, not from the kitchen sink or the bathroom, but from somewhere behind the wall. It had that hollow, underwater sound, slow, deliberate, too measured to be a leak. When I got up to check, I noticed something that turned my stomach. The towel I'd hung over the bathroom mirror was wet, not soaked, but damp enough that small droplets slid down its edge and pattered onto the tile floor. I didn't look underneath, I just couldn't. By the time I got to the Institute the next evening, the unease had settled into a kind of quiet dread. The air outside was thick with humidity, the kind that carries the smell of the sea miles inland. Inside, everything felt heavier. The fluorescent lights buzzed like flies, and the floor shimmered faintly under their reflection, just enough to make you want to look down, but be afraid to. The duty board had changed again. My name was listed under a new assignment. Sublevel C, Reflective Breach Containment. Supervisor authorization required. I stared at it for a long moment. Nobody ever got sent to Sublevel C. It wasn't even marked on the standard building map. I'd only heard about it through rumors, a sealed maintenance level used for research overflow, whatever that meant. Marla was already in her suit, fastening the Velcro cuffs of her gloves. "You're going down there?" she asked quietly. "I guess so. You know what's in sublevel C?" She hesitated, glancing at the security camera mounted above us. "Just follow protocol," she said. "And if you hear knocking, don't answer." "Knocking from where?" Her eyes flicked toward the floor, then back to me. "You'll know." The elevator to sublevel C required Finch's card. He didn't say a word to me during the descent, just stared straight ahead, hands clasped behind his back. The lights dimmed as we passed the second level, the hum of machinery fading into the sound of running water. When the doors opened, a wave of cold air hit me. The entire floor was dimly lit, the walls lined with observation windows that looked into pitch-black tanks. The floor was wet, and the smell sharp, chemical, with an undertone of rot clung to the air. "This is containment," Finch said simply. "Temporary holding until the breach stabilizes." "What's in the tanks?" I asked. He ignored the question. "You'll do standard maintenance. Replace filters, log activity. Don't engage with anything that reflects you." "Engage?" I repeated, but he was already walking away. "The tanks here weren't like the others. They weren't filled with fish or coral. Each was a sealed unit, black glass on all sides, the kind that reflects everything around it, but shows nothing inside. The temperature dropped the farther I went, until I could see my breath cloud in front of me. I started my checklist pressure readings, filtration flow, pH balance, all normal. But then I reached tank 3C. The glass was fogged, except for one clean spot at eye level. A perfect oval, like someone had wiped it from the inside. My heart started to pound. I leaned closer, trying to see through it, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw movement behind the glass. Slow, like a shape turning in deep water. Then, faintly, came the knocking. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. Exactly the same rhythm as before. I stepped back. "Finch?" I whispered into the radio. "I'm hearing something in 3C. No response. Only static. The knocking came again, louder this time. Then another sound beneath it. A voice. Muffled. Distant. But distinctly human. "Let me out." I froze. My mouth went dry. The voice was so faint I could barely be sure it was real. But it was there. I lifted my flashlight, forgetting the no-light rule for a second, and flicked it on. The beam hit the glass, and I saw a face, pale, half-submerged, eyes open and staring. The lips moved again, though no sound reached me through the barrier. It took me a few seconds to realize what I was seeing wasn't inside the tank. It was a reflection mine, but distorted, soaked, eyes clouded like something that had drowned. I turned the flashlight off immediately. The afterimage burned behind my eyes. When I blinked, I saw the same fogged oval shape again, only now there were handprints forming around it. From the inside, I backed away, nearly tripping over a hose reel, and radioed again. "Finch, something's happening down here. There's something..." Static again. But through the static, a voice whispered, faint and warped. "Don't let it see you leave." That wasn't Finch. The tank began to vibrate softly, the sound building like distant thunder. I turned and ran, water splashing under my boots as I reached the elevator. The doors slid open after what felt like an eternity, and Finch was standing inside. He didn't look surprised, just tired. "I told you to keep the lights off," he said quietly. "There's someone in there," I said, voice trembling. "A face, hands." He shook his head. "There's something in there, but it's not someone." As the doors closed and the elevator started up, I caught one last look at the containment corridor. Every tank was fogging now, patches of condensation forming human-like outlines against the glass. And for just a heartbeat, all the outlines turned toward me. When we reached the surface, Finch finally spoke again. "You'll file no report. What you saw is part of the breach study. It's under control." "It didn't look under control," I said. His eyes met mine for the first time. "Daniel, everything here is controlled until it isn't. And when it isn't, we replace the staff photo." That shut me up. As I clocked out that morning, I noticed something strange. My ID badge photo, the small laminated square clipped to my chest, had changed. The image was warped slightly, like water damage, and my reflected eyes seemed off-center, staring somewhere else. I rubbed the plastic, thinking it was a trick of the light, but the distortion didn't move. When I looked up, the reflection of the tank hallway in the glass office door shimmered faintly, as though something was watching from below. After witnessing the reflective breach firsthand, Daniel begins to understand that something in the Institute isn't just contained, it's leaking. Reflections are starting to act independently, and Finch's cryptic warnings hint that the Institute's experiments with deep-sea light and consciousness have gone terribly wrong. The next few nights passed in a haze of exhaustion. My reflection, no matter where I saw it, never seemed to match me perfectly anymore. It was in the timing, the tilt of the head, the delay in the blink. Sometimes it would smile when I didn't. Sometimes, if I turned too fast, I'd catch it still staring forward for a heartbeat too long before catching up. I tried not to look at anything reflective, but that was almost impossible at the Institute. Everything down there gleamed. Stainless steel panels, polished floors, observation glass. It was like working inside a mirror maze designed by someone who hated people. Finch didn't speak to me much after the containment incident. Neither did Marla. She avoided my eyes completely now. The few times I tried to talk to her, she just shook her head like I was already in too deep. One evening, just before shift change, I caught her in the locker room, staring into the cracked mirror above the sink. She didn't notice me at first. She was whispering something, soft, rhythmic, almost like reciting numbers. "Marla," I said. She jumped. Her eyes were glassy, distant, as if she'd been halfway somewhere else. Then she blinked and seemed to wake up. "Don't sneak up on people," she muttered. "What were you saying just now?" "Nothing. You were counting." She hesitated. "It helps," she said finally. "Keeps them quiet." "Who?" Her lips tightened, and she just walked out. That shift, the hallways were darker than usual. The main lighting grid was under maintenance, so the only illumination came from the glow of the tanks themselves. The water shimmered in shades of deep green and electric blue, casting slow-moving ripples across the walls. I was assigned to filter recalibration in the East Wing. Mostly empty tanks, unused sections of the building. The smell of chlorine was thicker there, and the hum of the machinery echoed down the hall like a heartbeat. As I walked, I noticed something off about the reflection in the tank glass beside me. The angle of my reflection didn't match where I stood. I took a step forward. My reflection took a step backward. I froze. Then, slowly, the reflected version of me lifted its hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. I didn't move. The hand stayed there, palm against the pane. Tiny bubbles rose behind it, as if it were standing underwater. I backed away, pulse pounding. The reflected hand slid down the glass, leaving behind a faint streak, like condensation or blood. That's when the lights flickered again. Once, twice. When they steadied, the reflection was gone, but the streak on the glass was still there. Later that night, I found Finch in the control bay reviewing old footage, grainy black and white video from the sub-level cameras. He didn't look up as I entered. "Sir," I said, "there's something wrong with the reflections again. East Wing, Tank 2A." He cut me off. "Sit down, Holt." I did. He replayed one of the clips on the monitor, a timestamp from a few weeks ago. It showed a worker in uniform mopping near a tank. The reflection on the glass didn't match him. It was slower, then faster, then it began moving independently. The worker stopped, stared, dropped the mop, and ran out of frame. Finch paused the video. "He quit the next day," he said. "At least, that's what the paperwork says." "I haven't been able to confirm where he went." "You mean you think—" "I don't think," he interrupted sharply. "I know." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You've seen what's inside 9B, right? The shimmer in the water?" I nodded slowly. "That's not bioluminescence. It's reflective matter. Photonic mimicry. We thought we could study it, maybe even use it for adaptive optics. But when they brought it up from the trench, it brought something else with it." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. "So what are we containing exactly?" I asked. Finch sighed, rubbing his temples. "We call it a breach, but that's just a word we use when we don't understand something. The truth is, it's not in the tanks anymore. It's in the reflections themselves. Whatever it is, it learns by watching." He turned off the monitor. "The less you give it to observe, the better." I didn't know what to say. My throat felt dry. "Go home early," Finch said quietly, "and cover your mirrors." I took his advice, but home wasn't much safer. When I stepped into my apartment, the first thing I noticed was the smell of seawater, faint but unmistakable. The towels I draped over the mirrors were damp again. My boots left wet prints across the floor, even though I hadn't stepped in any puddles. I checked the bathroom. The towel covering the mirror was half slipped off. Beneath it, I saw movement. I froze. The mirror surface shimmered faintly, like light seen through moving water. My reflection was there, but it wasn't me. The skin was pale, lips slightly blue. Its eyes tracked me perfectly, but too smoothly, like it was anticipating me rather than copying me. Then it smiled. My reflection smiled. I hadn't moved. I backed out of the bathroom and slammed the door, heart pounding. I could hear faint splashing from the other side of the wall, like waves lapping against glass. I didn't sleep that night. When I returned to the institute the next evening, the corridor smelled stronger, salt, rust, something organic decaying in the vents. Marla wasn't at her station. Finch wasn't in the control bay. The whole place felt hollow, like the echoes came from somewhere deeper than the building itself. There was a file folder left open on Finch's desk. I shouldn't have looked, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside were old incident reports, some dating back 10 years. The words were heavily redacted, but certain phrases stood out. Subject exhibited delayed reflection behavior. Mirror containment breach personnel absorbed. Observed duplication of biological form. My stomach turned. The signatures at the bottom of each report were different, but the handwriting looked similar, almost identical. I flipped to the last page. A photograph had been stapled there. It was blurry, taken through a viewing window. A man in a maintenance suit, pressed against the inside of the tank glass. The face, distorted by water and light, looked exactly like mine. The file slipped from my hands. That's when I heard it. The faint knock, knock, knock from somewhere down the hall. 3 slow taps, then silence. It came again, louder. I turned toward the source, the main observation corridor. Every tank along the wall glowed faintly in the darkness. The knocking grew rhythmic, overlapping, echoing from multiple directions. And then, in unison, all the lights went out. The darkness wasn't empty. It moved. The glass wall shimmered with faint silhouettes pressing from the inside, dozens of them, like a crowd behind frosted glass. I could hear the wet sound of hands dragging across the panes, the gentle slosh of water from nowhere. Something whispered my name from the dark, my own voice, perfectly mimicked. Dash, dash. Daniel. I bolted toward the exit. But as I passed the tanks, I caught glimpses of my reflection in each one. Not copies, variations. Some grinning, some wide-eyed. One whispering something inaudible through the barrier. They were all me. By the time I reached the stairwell door, the knocking had stopped. Everything fell silent again. Only the faint hum of the filtration pumps remained. steady and mechanical, as if nothing had happened. I leaned against the wall, shaking, soaked in sweat. The glass window in the stairwell door reflected my face, pale, terrified, breathing hard. Then slowly, it blinked after I did. Daniel realizes the reflections are evolving. They're not just copying, they're replacing. As the institute falls eerily quiet, he discovers missing staff records and security footage, showing duplicates walking the halls after the originals disappeared. The line between reality and reflection begins to blur, leading Daniel toward the truth hidden in the Institute's deepest level. By morning, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. The Institute's walls, my apartment, my own skin, it all felt thinner somehow. Like if I just pressed hard enough, I could break through and see the thing underneath. When I arrived for the next shift, the building felt wrong, too quiet. The guard at the gate wasn't there, though his chair was still spinning, coffee still steaming on the post table. The air smelled metallic, like rain on concrete, and there was a low humming sound coming from deep within the lower levels. The elevator lights flickered as I descended to sublevel 3. My reflection in the mirrored door looked washed out, like a bad photograph left in sunlight too long. For the first time, I noticed it wasn't blinking at all. When the doors opened, the hum grew louder, vibrating through the floor, through my bones. The hallway lights pulsed faintly in rhythm with it. I walked past the empty security desks, each monitor still on, screens showing endless loops of camera feeds. Every hallway looked deserted. Every hallway except one, feed 12B. Someone, or something, was standing just outside tank 9B. The silhouette was blurry, too tall to be Marla, too thin to be Finch. It just stood there, facing the glass, completely still. I grabbed a flashlight and went down there. The air near 9B was cold enough to sting. Condensation clung to every surface, dripping from the ceiling. The lights inside the tank were still on, but the water was no longer clear. It shimmered like mercury, reflecting and distorting everything around it. And there, in front of it, stood Finch. At least, it looked like him. His back was to me, uniform soaked, one hand pressed to the tank glass. "Sir?" I said, voice echoing in the corridor. He didn't move. I stepped closer. The floor beneath my boots squelched. Water, but darker, thicker. When I reached out, the thing that looked like Finch turned slightly. Its face was wrong. Too smooth, too symmetrical. The eyes glistened, perfectly round and glassy. When it spoke, the voice sounded wet, like something struggling to form words through a mouth full of liquid. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel." I stumbled back. My flashlight slipped and rolled across the floor, casting spinning light around the walls. In the quick flashes, I saw more faces pressing against the inside of the tank, distorted, human-like, mouths opening and closing silently beneath the surface. Then Finch's reflection, if that's what it was, turned fully toward me. His skin shimmered faintly, like it was reflecting something that wasn't there. "They watch through us now," he said. "We gave them mirrors. We gave them doors." "Where's Marla?" I managed to whisper. "Gone," he said. Or maybe it was the tank saying it. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "She crossed over. They needed someone to teach them how to move." He stepped toward me. I turned and ran. Every corridor I sprinted down seemed to loop back to the tanks. The reflections in the windows twisted as I passed, mouths moving without sound, eyes following in perfect unison. The emergency exit lights flickered, then went out entirely, one by one. At one corner, I saw movement. Marla, or something wearing her face. She was half submerged in the flooded passage, her uniform heavy with water. Her reflection in the floor moved faster than she did, like it was pulling her along. Her lips parted. "Daniel," she said softly, "it's easier if you stop running." Her reflection smiled wider than her face could. Then the lights above her shorted out, and she was gone. I kept moving. I didn't even realize I'd made it to the control bay until I slammed into the door. Inside, the hum was louder. The monitors were flickering between static and live feeds. On every screen, I saw myself, standing in different hallways, looking at the camera, sometimes smiling, sometimes standing perfectly still. Each version of me blinked at different times. I grabbed the intercom mic and pressed the button, voice trembling. "This is Daniel Holt, maintenance shift. If anyone can hear me, something's happening down here. The reflections, they're alive. They're..." A high-pitched feedback scream cut me off. The mic burned my hand. On the nearest monitor, my reflection turned its head toward me, even though I wasn't moving. Then, one by one, all the other Daniels turned too. Their mouths opened, and every screen whispered my name at once. I don't remember leaving the control room. The next thing I knew, I was in the main corridor, water up to my ankles. The overhead lights flickered on and off, casting the space in flashes of silver. Each time they lit up, the reflections on the glass were closer. I ran, splashing through the corridor until I reached the containment doors for sub-level 4. The restricted area no one was supposed to access. The keypad was slick with condensation. I didn't know the code, but the door was already unlocked. It slid open with a low hiss. The space beyond was vast and dimly lit. Rows of tanks lined the chamber, but these weren't filled with water. They were filled with mirrors, huge curved slabs of glass submerged in clear fluid. The surface of each one rippled faintly, as if breathing. In the center of the room stood a single large observation window. Behind it, the water was black. Something moved beneath it. It rose slowly, almost gracefully, until its surface met the glass. A shape took form, something vaguely human, featureless, but its outline shimmered like light bending underwater. I felt it before I heard it, a vibration in my chest, deep and resonant, a whisper without sound. "Come closer." My body moved without permission. My hand lifted, palm toward the glass. The surface rippled, and for a split second, I saw my own face staring back at me, calm, expressionless, perfect. Then the reflection smiled. The glass cracked. A thin line split across the pane, branching like veins. Water began to leak through, first a trickle, then a stream. I stumbled back as alarms blared through the facility. Red lights flashed, painting everything in pulses of crimson. The mirror water poured across the floor, cold as ice, climbing up my boots, my legs. I tried to run, but it was too fast. It moved like it wanted me. As it reached my chest, I looked down and saw my reflection in the flood, staring up at me, moving a split second ahead. Then, for the first time, I saw its lips form words before mine could. "Let go." I don't remember much after that. When I woke up, I was lying in the hallway outside sub-level 4. The alarms were silent. The tanks were empty. The water was gone, but the reflections remained. Every surface showed a faint shimmer like oil on glass. When I looked at myself, the reflection smiled, faintly before I did. The badge on my uniform was different. The name tag didn't say Holt. It said Finch. Daniel begins to realize he may not have escaped at all, or that the real Daniel never existed anymore. The Institute's emergency lockdown traps him inside as he tries to uncover who, or what, has taken control. In the reflection, another version of him starts moving independently, whispering that the experiment never ended. I don't know how long I was lying there. The air was still damp, the hum of the generators distant, irregular, like something mechanical struggling to remember how to breathe. When I finally pushed myself up, my knees left streaks on the wet floor that didn't reflect properly. The streaks on the ground shimmered slightly, like they were alive. The badge on my chest still read, Finch. The longer I stared at it, the less wrong it seemed. When I touched the plastic, the letters rippled, like they were under glass. I told myself I needed to find a phone, a way out, anyone. But the corridors had changed again. Every turn led me back to the central observation bay, where the big tank, the black one, loomed in the center of the floor. The control consoles were dead. The emergency lights blinked weakly, and floating inside the tank, barely visible in the murky water, was a shape that moved exactly the way I did. I waved my hand. It waved back, but a half-second too early. I tried to leave again. The first door I reached had been welded shut. The second opened to a hallway that ended abruptly in solid concrete. No signage, no exit symbols, just blank, cold walls. The air felt thicker now, like breathing through water. When I reached for my radio, the static had a rhythm, a low, distorted version of my own voice, whispering through the noise. "You stayed too long. They needed someone who remembers the rules." I turned it off, but the whisper didn't stop. It was coming from the walls. I started running again. Somewhere down the hall, I heard footsteps. Wet, slow, deliberate. When I turned the corner, I saw a figure standing in front of the maintenance lockers. Marla. She looked normal. Too normal. Her uniform was spotless, her hair dry, her expression calm. "Marla," I said, almost laughing from relief. "You're alive." She didn't answer. She just tilted her head slightly, eyes glassy. "Where is everyone? Finch? The others?" She smiled, faintly. "They're here." Her reflection on the steel locker behind her smiled wider, impossibly wide, teeth sharp as glass. "You shouldn't be here, Daniel," she said softly, "but they're happy you stayed." And then she stepped backward, into the reflection. The metal surface rippled like water, and she was gone. I stood frozen for what felt like minutes. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would burst. When I finally dared to touch the locker, it was solid, cold, real. The reflection, though, it blinked. Back in the observation bay, the figure in the main tank was closer now. The water inside shimmered with faint light. I could see its face more clearly, my face. But the eyes were darker, almost black. It raised its hand slowly, pointing to the panel beside the tank, the emergency purge switch. A sign taped beside it read, "Rule 13, never drain a tank during reflection shift." But the red indicator light beneath the switch was blinking. The hum in the floor deepened. Somewhere behind me, a door clanged open and shut. I knew I wasn't alone anymore, but I didn't dare look back. I pressed the button. For a second, nothing happened. Then, deep within the tank, the water began to churn. Slowly at first, then violently, until the entire structure shook. The glass flexed and moaned, spiderweb cracks forming across its surface. The thing inside the water pressed its hands to the glass. Its mouth opened soundlessly. My reflection on the surface of the tank grinned, even though I wasn't. The glass shattered. Water exploded outward, slamming me into the control console. I tried to crawl, but something was pulling at my legs. Cold, slick, unyielding. The water wasn't just water anymore. It clung to me, crawling upward like hands made of liquid glass. I gasped, trying to reach the door. But the hallway on the other side wasn't a hallway anymore. It was an endless corridor of reflections. Tank glass, polished floor, wet walls, all showing me from 100 different angles. Some of them were smiling. Some were whispering. One was screaming silently, trapped behind the surface. And then I realized I wasn't moving anymore. My reflection was. It tilted its head slowly, studying me with curiosity. Then, in one smooth motion, it raised a hand and pressed it against the inside of the glass. The cold spread through me, deep and sharp. I saw flashes, faces of the staff, rooms beneath the facility, something vast and ancient floating in black water, a network of eyes staring up through mirrored surfaces. The reflections weren't mirrors, they were windows, and whatever lived beyond them had finally found its way through. When I came to, I was standing in the lobby of Deepwater Institute. Morning sunlight poured through the skylight, gentle and golden. The receptionist smiled when I passed. The smell of salt and disinfectant was faint, but familiar. Everything was normal, perfectly normal, except for one thing. The people walking by didn't cast reflections. When I looked down at the polished tile, my own reflection smiled back at me a second too late. I walked to the front doors. The security guard, new face, young, nervous, nodded politely. "Morning, sir." I nodded back, forcing a smile. Morning. Outside, the world looked the same. Seagulls circled the coast. Cars moved along the highway. But the sunlight felt dimmer, somehow, filtered through a thin film of water. And as I passed a puddle on the sidewalk, my reflection stopped walking. It just stood there, watching. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know if I ever left the Institute. Sometimes when it rains, I can hear the humming again, low and patient, vibrating through the ground. I still remember all the rules. Never turn off the tank lights after 2 a.m. Never look directly at the glass for too long. Never let your reflection lag behind. But I think the most important one was the one I didn't understand until now. Never work alone. Because when you're alone, it's hard to tell which side of the glass you're really on. The rain hasn't stopped in 3 days. My phone screen shows my face even when it's black. Sometimes it smiles when I don't. I think they learned how to follow me home. And I think, no, I know, that the man writing this isn't the one who started cleaning aquariums at Deepwater Institute. Maybe he never left that night. Maybe I'm still under the water, looking up, waiting for someone else to take my place.